What makes time-lapse work is there has to be some change in the interval that you shoot, in the time that you shoot. It needs something changing in the background. It needs cars to be moving, it needs to be clouds that's moving. If you photograph something where there's not much movement and you do time-lapse of it, it's going to look like video. You really need the rate of change. Something needs to be changing. So if you have a static tripod, static camera on a tripod, it looks good, but where it really starts to become magic is when you have some kind of cinematic movement. And the cinematic movement can be something you do in post. If you shoot stills and you have a 24 megapixel camera or something like that, 1080p is only 2 megapixels. So that gives you a whole range that you can zoom into something or zoom out. So for the camera to move, you can see the one there is a dolly that I have stacked up there. I have 2 dollies. One of them is collapsible, so I can travel with it more easily. And then what also works is, what I have here is a rotational device, so the camera can rotate. Gives you a nice sweeping view of something. You can obviously combine the two, where you have the dolly moving and the rotational thing happening. So that camera movement gives you, again, the cinematic sweep, the cinematic movement. It looks really good. If it's all in the background, the city scene and the clouds and flickering lights and the boats moving in the river, a slider doesn't really make sense because there's nothing in the foreground. Where the slider makes sense is if there's a railing or the ground. If you look at the House of Cards intro, you'll see that it's railing on the street or something close up in the foreground, because you need something in the foreground to sweep by as the camera moves with a rate of change in the background. So whether I use a slider or the rotational device or just a static camera will depend obviously then on my subject. What am I photographing? So I want to walk through some of the math. Don't be scared, you'll have to get used to this. But there are 4 things we have to juggle. The duration of the event, how long it's going to take, and then the duration of the final clip, and then your shutter speed, and the shutter speed depends on the interval. Let's say we want to shoot a 30-second clip. That's the final result. If we decide on a frame rate of 30 frames a second, that means 30 times 30, it means we need to shoot 900 frames. How long is the event? Hour, 2 hours. So let's say 2 hours. I need to have 900 frames spread over 2 hours. Now to have that continual movement, that perception of flowing movement, if your interval is 5 seconds, it's ideal that you have your shutter speed about 2/3 of that. So we want a shutter speed of 3 seconds, maybe 4 seconds for a 5-second interval. That gives us smooth movement. So we juggle these 4 balls and get to optimal settings. And obviously to get to a 4-second exposure in daylight, neutral density filter. So you're going to stock up on a 6-stop neutral density filter, 10-stop neutral density filter, really to take that shutter speed way down. That's for daylight. Obviously if you shoot star trails at night, different considerations. Okay, so this kind of math, we can do the math in our head and count on our fingertips, or you have very handy calculators, time-lapse calculators for your smartphone that'll help you with this. And because they all affect one another, if you juggle one thing, it'll affect something else, and you'll very quickly get a sense of how these 4 things interrelate. And obviously, your equipment that you use will do this for you as well. So for example, with the rotational device that I have, there's a motor that will drive the thing to rotate the camera, but this is controlled by a motion controller. And the motion controller connects with Bluetooth to my smartphone, and on that, the whole calculation is not done for me. You've got to have some intelligent input into it, but it's made a lot easier for you. The decision there is a lot more clearer in terms of your interval, shutter speed, duration, all of that. So there are tools for this, either on your smartphone or with the devices that you will use. So we can quickly talk about camera settings. Ideally, we have everything as fixed as possible. You don't want to shoot in aperture priority because then shutter speed changes as your camera decides the metering needs to adjust the shutter speed, and you get flicker. You can control flicker in post-production, but again, as with anything in photography, it's always the best idea to get the optimum quality directly in camera. So I shoot manual. Now obviously a controller like this Where did I put it down? Now obviously, if you need transition from darker to brighter, etc., and the controller takes over, but this will intelligently do it for you. So you are going to shoot in manual shutter speed, manual aperture, manual ISO. You might have a controller changing that for you, but you need to absolutely fix your camera settings. Similarly, if you have a lens with vibration reduction or stabilization, you need to switch that off, because every time the camera will take a shot, it might adjust the stabilization, so you want that off. You want autofocusing off, you want manual focus. Ideally, if you have a manual diaphragm in your lens, even better. So you'll find a lot of your time-lapse shooters shoot with Canon bodies, but with older Nikon lenses, because you have the mechanical aperture ring and no control between the camera. So when you stop down to f11, that f11 remains exactly where you set it, and without that slight change, that bit of change in the tolerance, and that will help minimize flicker. So everything in shooting time-lapse is manual. You decide on everything, you set everything, with maybe a bit of help from one of these controllers.